Hi, and welcome back to VMware Cloud Director 101. And in today's session, we're going to talk about the user experience in terms of the user interface for vCloud Director and what a tenant can actually do once they're in vCloud Director. So we've explained so far, from the service provider's view, the configuration of all the resource pools in their vCenter environment, the abstraction of those into provider virtual data centers, and then serving those up using different allocation models into org VDCs for the tenants to consume. We've also explained the real importance of monitoring for these services that you're providing to make sure you're within the threshold for the tenant to have a good experience and not run out of resources depending on what you're using. Obviously, if you're using reservation, that's not going to matter. But it might matter from an upsell perspective if your tenant's getting close to their full reservation consumption. It's a great pick up the phone and talk about more and expanding that resource pool.
Yes.
So from a tenant's perspective, we introduced the concept of them logging into the interface and seeing an org resource pool where they can spin up their VMs. There's one other key concept we're going to talk about in another session, which is vApps. But before we get to that, let's talk about what they can do in vCloud Director. So fundamentally, we talked about compute, storage, memory. What else can they do in vCloud Director today?
So in addition to the basic compute characteristics, they can define their networking from a microsegmentation point of view. So it appears as security in the menu, and within that, customers can create policies for distributed firewall. So that's an NSX feature, and that allows you to create, as a customer, on a self-service basis, microsegmentation policies for firewalling.
Right. So microsegmentation and edge firewalling, or
and edge firewalling,
right.
So both.
So if you have, I'll start drawing them up here. If you have 4 VMs in your org VDC, you have a network obviously between them. They're all interconnected. And then you have the potential to create what we call an edge gateway here for traffic to come inbound and outbound. So I can control them policies of what can come in and out. And that's included in the base Flex Core module for a consumption billing to VMware. But then you also talk about micro-segmentation where I can create policies per VM, right?
Exactly.
Okay, and that's great for east-west protection.
Precisely, and this is something the customer can activate later. They don't have to use it from day one, and it's not a policy that the service provider has to enforce from day one for every customer. It's flexible.
And does the tenant need to know anything about the underlying networking to do any of this?
No, so the whole point of an org VDC, a virtual data center, is that the customer is the king of the kingdom. So they get to control the network topology completely. The service provider gives them an edge, and that gives them their north-south boundary into the rest of the service provider and the public internet. And then beneath that, if the customer chooses to build a very complex topology of multiple routed networks, they can do that on a self-service basis. They don't have to worry about IP overlapping with other customers. They don't have to take into account IP schemes dictated by the service provider. So remember, everything below the edge is under the control of the customer completely.
Right.
Things like public IP addresses for publishing to the internet, that's something issued to the customer, that's under the service provider's control.
And that would be something that exists on the edge gateway here, so
yes.
Public IP. Then I guess you've got sort of NAT, correct me if I'm wrong.
This is good, basic
DHCP,
network services, yeah.
All the network services within the org VDC.
Yep. Load balancers too.
Okay, so they would be kind of, where, internal or external? They'd be
They're just all on the edge.
edge, right, okay. Some more load balancers. Alright, so this is all completely controllable within the VCD UI.
Yeah, this is all self-service. So a customer from day one, once they've been onboarded to a platform, they go into their org VDC, they can create their network services, so create load balancers, create some routed networks, and then they're ready to start working with their VMs.
Okay, cool. And in terms of other sorts of services, where can they find, is there a catalog they go to consume, for example, the VM sizes, the t-shirt sizing we talked about here?
So when a customer works with an org VDC, they have a few options. When they go to create a new vApp or a new VM, they have a choice between using a template, either that's one the customer has created, or possibly one the service provider has created from a central catalog, and they can deploy VMs workloads from that. If they choose new VM and they choose not to use a template, then they get to define everything. So they choose the operating system type, They have the opportunity to present an image, so that could be an ISO image or a boot image of some description, which they can upload into the portal and store in their own catalog within vCloud Director. And then along with that, they can choose the t-shirt size for the VM as they're deploying it. So it could be something like, I'm going to choose a medium-size Microsoft Windows-based server. I've got my own image, so when this VM is powered on for the first time in my virtual data center, I'll attach the virtual ISO and the OS installation will begin. Alternatively, I'll just take one that the service provider's created for me.
And that's a great opportunity for service providers to sell additional services, right? In terms of hardened build for OS, that type of thing.
Yes.
Okay, great.
And of course, all of the follow-on services, so things like patch management, that's potentially something a service provider could sell to the customer. So if you take our Linux distribution, for example, you get a repo and continual management of patching and upgrading.
Oh, awesome.
All part of the service.
Excellent. Okay. And now, as a tenant, I'm very conscious I'm consuming a service. I might be consuming something that I'm paying for as it goes, and we all know that public cloud services can spiral out of control in terms of cost. Yes. How can I, as a tenant, understand my usage and potentially how much I'm going to have to pay?
Okay, so it's nice and straightforward. It's easy. So when the customer logs in for the first time, their initial view is a dashboard of their org VDCs. Mm-hmm. In that, very simple dashboard of the number of VMs deployed, number powered on, crucially, and the total CPU and memory and storage allocated and consumed. So they can see at any point in time what's being utilized directly. So that's the dashboard view, just to get a sense of what's going on, and crucially per org VDC.
But that's a snapshot point in time.
Exactly. Yeah. So if they want to see what the utilization is, say for the specialist SAP HANA workload org VDC, they can do that, so they get an understanding pretty quickly. If that's not sufficient detail, they can go further. So we have another product here, which is on the board, separate to vCloud Director, but tightly integrated, that keeps all of our metrics. So it's always doing capacity analytics, watching the customer workloads. Through vCloud Director, and deploying an additional component called the VROps Tenant app.
Mm-hmm. And this is a free component, right?
Yeah, exactly. If you've got VROps in the mix, you just have to deploy the appliance, integrate it with VCD, and crucially what it does is it presents VROps dashboards in a multi-tenanted way. So the VROps product itself doesn't support multi-tenancy, but great, vCloud Director does. So with the appliance deployed, we can then add and extend the interface of vCloud Director to show the VROps dashboards for the customer, and crucially just the objects they manage. So within the vCloud Director portal, you have a hamburger stack at the top, and at the moment we've been talking about everything on the cloud resources node, my virtual data centers. Further down, I can see my monitoring, so I can see if I select that option within the vCloud Director portal itself. So one portal, I can then see all of the monitoring and analytics for my virtual machines, for my vApps.
Brilliant.
And I can see alarms, I can see alerts, and billing as well. So if I want to see what the billing policies are and what I have to pay at the end of the month, I can present that as a service provider to customers in the portal too.
Got it. All right, cool. And just to confirm for those who are wondering, that prior to, I think it was about a year ago, if you had deployed VROps, you would have been charged for everything that vCenter is managing. So say I connected it to this vCenter, I would have been charged for this entire cluster. Now with VROps and with the Flex program, if you are turning on monitoring specifically for, obviously within the tenant portal, you're going to be, tenant app, you're going to be monitoring through the tenant dashboard. But if you wanted to turn on an uplift monitoring for VROps, and wanted to say, just this customer's VMs, but potentially not another org VDC, and they're on the same cluster, that you only get charged for what you're actually using.
That's
which
true.
is a nice feature. So, and the same with NSX as well. You only get charged for if you want to uplift one org VDC to microsegmentation and not another org VDC, you're only going to pay for the VMs that are actually using the microsegmentation.
That's exactly right.
Great. Okay, so that gives me a really good understanding then of what as a tenant I can do. And I think one of the beauties here is I'm no longer having to worry about VPNs and load balancers and all sorts of stuff down here and get rid of all that hardware. Now we're providing a single interface for customers. Even if it's a remote vCenter over here, they can still come via VCD, right?
That's right.
Yeah.
So self-service, the customer doesn't have to raise a ticket anymore to get a load balancer created in the data center using whatever tool, whatever functionality. It's all there for the customer to build themselves in their own time.
Excellent. And now we're kind of approaching the service layer of VCD. Next session we're going to talk about how we can extend services and provide your own services in vCloud Director.